wow. Seungmin would be a great therapist. I'm just putting this out there right now. Everything I have seen about Seungmin tells me that he would be an excellent therapist. Um, because that's exactly what you have to do as a therapist, is you have to be able to identify, like, okay, this person is missing some information that'd be really helpful to them, or this person is missing some context, or this person needs a bit of a reframe, right? But you can't just tell a person to do that. We know it doesn't work. You cannot just tell a person, don't do that. You can't just tell a person, that's a bad idea. If you get close enough, you eventually sort of can. You know, I have a couple clients who I've been seeing for a couple of years who I can sort of be like, I'm concerned that's not a good idea. And I can say it that bluntly. But even that is not as blunt as, like, that is a bad idea. I very rarely will say that is a bad idea unless I have, like, imminent safety concerns or, like, something like that. And again, only if I have a really good rapport with my client. Um, it is a lot more effective to be like, hey, this might be information that would be helpful to you. Which it sounds like is kind of exactly what Felix is saying, is that, like, you know a lot of this, and I had to come to terms with not. But the way you've told me has been inviting me into the process of understanding, not just forcing it on me. Hello, darlings, and welcome back to Stray Kids the Megaverse YouTube edition, wherein a podcaster who has not released an episode of a podcast in like 4 months pretends they're a YouTuber, which I guess I'm more of that than a podcaster at this point, but I'll talk more about that at the end of this episode. I'll give content updates at the end of this episode per usual. My name is Lola by B, in case you don't know. I am a clinical social worker. I'm a outpatient therapist who specializes in multiply marginalized identities, particularly disability, neurodivergence, and queerness. And I talk a lot about Stray Kids, and I react to Stray Kids things, and this is my third 2kidsroom reaction. Why am I doing SeungLix? I'll talk about that at the end of this episode too, but ultimately it's because I decided that's what I wanted to fucking react to right now. And yes, I know Hyunsung just came out, and I will do that next. I'm hoping to do both of them today. I don't have a lot of confidence in my ability to do both of them today, but hopefully tomorrow I'll get to Hyunsung. Quick content warning for this episode. I've been doing my best to matrix dodge spoilers for 2kidsroom's reactions. And I've done pretty well. I do know, however, for this one in particular, I am going to have to give I'm probably going to need to give a content warning for disordered eating. I don't anticipate going into it a lot, as people who have experienced other types of my content or follow me on Threads know. I do talk about disordered eating in relationship to celebritydom and idoldom fairly frequently, and I've gone into it more in depth before, and I will go more in depth into it in the future. So I'm hoping to not have to go too in depth to it now. If you don't know, prior to being an outpatient therapist like I am now, I spent a little while working in high acuity disordered eating disorders in teenagers, in residential partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient. So that used to be a specialty of mine. Because of my client population, queer folks, neurodivergent folks, I still work with it periodically. But not as frequently as I used to. I just know that that is something that can be very, very triggering for people. And I also know that people have a tendency of getting kind of defensive when I bring it up in relationship to idols. So I'm sort of mentioning it from the get-go that, like, my understanding of this episode is that it is something that I will end up talking about. So that, you know, we can all just be on the same page about, like, listening a little bit first. Yeah, other than that, let's get into it because, I'll give all of the various content updates and other things later. I've got a little over an hour to do this time around, so hopefully that keeps me restrained, because my Seungmin and IN reaction went much longer than I anticipated. So hopefully we don't go over an hour and 15 minutes on this one, which might be difficult because I do love this duo a lot. Yeah, let's do it.
매일 보는 느낌이랑 뭐.
I mean, you do mostly.
와 진짜 못 보겠다. 와 저때 왜 저렇게
Was it like that?
진짜 똥개 같다.
Yeah, you were.
와 생각보다 사진 진짜 많이 찍었다.
은근히 요새 같이 찍은 사진이 없네. 진짜 사진이 없네. 이거 오랜만이다. 143 때네.
양갈래하고 첫 MC 같이 하는 거. 그다음에 이거는
I think it is something that's true that when you spend a lot of your time with someone, when you live with someone, for instance, you sort of forget about doing things like taking pictures. You forget about documenting your memories. You kind of always are documenting memories within your own memories. So it's sometimes not until you're looking back that you go like, oh, we don't have a lot of like physical data. We don't have a lot of physical proof of our relationship. You know, I think we're much more likely, especially in the era where it feels like we have infinite information and infinite data all the time, to document, like, we're just much more likely to document novel things. So I do think it's interesting that they're like, oh shit, we used to have a lot more pictures together than we do now.
뉴욕 음악 중심이었던 것 같은데 이때 진짜 커플 같네. 왜 커플같이 사진을 찍었지?
매일 보는 느낌이라 옛날 사진을 봐도 옛날 같지가 않네.
아 진짜 우리는 그때 너무 애기였구나. 아 어렵다. 다 귀여운데. MC 했을 때 그때 그 시절에는 영어 잘 하고 싶었던 마음이 있었고 나한테 많이 배우려고 내가 많이 가르쳐주고 또 이렇게 연습하는 것도 되게 웃겼어. 근데 재밌었어.
I think it's really cute how much the members helped Felix learn Korean, and we talk about that a lot, like in fandom. We talk a lot about like various members helping Felix with his Korean. We talk much less about Felix helping various members with their English. And maybe it's because like Felix, people like members will talk about Felix giving so much just in general that maybe those like individual things that he does sort of get lost in the like molasses of, yeah, like Felix just does things for us all the time.
기억에 남고 그냥 놀리고 싶은 약간 친구야. 깊게 봤을 때는 또 진짜 좋은 사람인 것 같아.
Yeah. I don't think you have to look that closely. I think Seungmin is actually pretty...
절대 올 일은 없다.
언제 들어가면 돼요?
Okay, I said that with INs, he must have done INs after he had done Chans, and I think that's true. He must have done this one immediately after he did Chans. That's so funny. I'm definitely not gonna cry. I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna sit in a different place because that place is tainted now. That place I've cried in. I was just crying there. I can't go back there because I'm gonna cry again if I do. So I'm gonna sit in this new place. And this new place, not gonna cry in. It's so cute.
들어와라.
싫다면
나가라.
숨이 죽어가거든.
무슨 얘기해야 되냐 누구야.
그렇게 생각하면 얘기가 안 나와.
그러니까
그냥 편하게 생각해.
Felix, what are you do?
우리 3년이래.
둘이 살기 시작하고 뭔가 다른 사람이랑 산다는 건 솔직히 상상이 잘 안 가. 뭔가 이게 일이 많았어서 그런가. 처음에 우리 인테리어 얘기.
인테리어 어떤 색감? 그냥 깔끔하게 화이트로 원했지.
맞아.
옛날 나무 약간 할머니 집 느낌이 있었어.
부엌도 갈아엎고. 해외를 갔을 때 내가 그 집을 보러 갔었잖아. 어디 이렇게 뜯어 고치면은
I wonder what they're, because I know that like obviously they were in dorms before, and I think we don't really know. I think it hasn't necessarily been like fully explained if they're still in places like owned by JYPE or if they're in places they own or like what that is. I just always think people shouldn't renovate things that they don't own. You know? Just don't do it. Make the owner do it. I don't know. That's just my own anarchism showing, I suppose.
진짜 살기 괜찮을 것 같다. 내가 꼭 믿어달라고 했잖아.
맞아 맞아.
너가 오케이 하고 이제 생각한 대로 딱딱 괜찮았어. 와 되게 그 분위기가 집 같아서.
그렇지.
좋았어. 맞아 우리 옷방도 생겼잖아.
맞아.
규격 다 재가지고 이제 업체분들 이렇게 연락해가지고.
Oh, this is so Seungmin.
줄자 들고.
Okay, yeah, no, so they contacted the company. Okay, so maybe they did have the company renovate it, or maybe they decided to. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I do think that like it shows they'd spend a lot of time living together, right? And they clearly know how to communicate. And I think that also it's pretty clear that like they know where their strengths are. So Seungmin obviously is like, okay, I know how to like do the logistics, which is completely unsurprising to me. Like that he's very detail oriented.
깨끗하게 사용하자. 짐이 너무 많아.
뭔가 쌓이기 시작하면 진짜 끝도 없는 거.
Wow, Felix had too much stuff? Shocker.
나 하나만 안 사.
하나만 안 사지. 그리고 요새 샤브샤브 소스. 냉장고에 4개가 있더라고. 4개가 5개.
맞아 4개인가 있어.
그 칠리 소스 찍어 먹는 전원 바로 연결해서 가열하는 가열식 냄비. 코드 연결하면 바로 끓일 수 있는 건데 나도 한두 번 써봤는데 좋더라고. 나 라면 끓여 먹을 때랑 이제 그 밀키트로 냉이 된장찌개 주문한 거.
맞아 그냥 올려놓는데 그냥 딱.
진짜 음식점처럼 먹을 수 있었으면 좋았어.
근데 나 이미 그 소스 이미 2병이나
다 먹었어?
거의.
진짜 샤브샤브만 먹어.
야채를 잘 안 먹다 보니까 아 먹어야겠다 하고 마시면서도 건강한 느낌.
Feels healthy.
일단 배송이 빠르고 너무 많지도 않고 또 너무 조그마지도 않고 예를 들면 코코넛.
What is your definition of not too much but not too little? Okay, so you'll explain. I drink Coke.
24개 있으면 적당하고 생각해요. 음료 이제
It feels excessive, but I also get it. It's really just about like the storage space in your house, but also like how if you're doing that with everything. I do hate shopping too much, but also if you're getting it in delivery, I do find it interesting how Felix clearly finds security in having enough of something.
잔뜩 살 때 이제 또 다시 냉장고에서 이제 정리하는 것도 우리 같이 하고 승민이는 뭐 창문 열고 그다음 바람 이제 공기 좀 리세트 될 수 있게.
Yeah, because you wear really
그래서 되게 서로
intense perfume.
부부 같아요.
하도 그때 겨울인가 밥 안 먹어가지고.
I know a lot of people were kind of talking about the married couple thing almost from a like I know that like the shipping culture was talking about that a lot, which is fair. I don't have any issues with that myself per se. But I do think that's something. Okay, so what I think that is actually relevant and actually fair, whether he meant it like this, obviously I don't know, but so when you live with somebody long term, when you have a nesting partner of whatever kind, you, as I sort of just said, learn how to take on certain roles and responsibilities. And a big part of living well together is delineating those roles and responsibilities in an equitable way. So both first relying on strengths. So what are our differential strengths that, like I, for instance, really not good at washing dishes for a variety of reasons, a lot of which have to do with chronic pain. My wife is totally fine with washing dishes. So, like, I have a weakness there, she has a strength there. It works out well. So first you sort of figure out who is strong, who is weak, in which places, whether this is an explicit conversation or not, right? And then you sort of figure out, like, of the places that we're weak in, how do we split those roles of responsibilities or find a different way to solve for those gaps? People who have been living together long term figure that out, whether intentionally or naturally or both, over time. Usually a healthy relationship, it's both. It's through both proactive communication, reactive communication, and just figuring each other out. So this is part of the reason why, one of the theories for the phenomena wherein there's been a couple who's been together for a very, very long time, and one of the people in that couple dies, it makes it much, much more likely for the other couple to die, you know, if they're older, within the next few years. And there's a lot of theories for this. One of the theories involves, it's not just this, but it involves the fact that once you've done this for long enough, you no longer have the skills to do the thing that the other partner does. So let's say one partner has a lot of skill in cooking and the other partner really doesn't. You spend 20 years together with one partner doing 80% of the cooking, and then that partner is gone. The other partner really no longer has those cooking skills. Like, maybe there's a little bit there because they haven't done, 0% of the cooking, but for the most part, they don't know how to cook for themselves anymore. It's not a skill they've had to use, and thus, even if they used to have that skill far in the past, it's probably a skill that they have forgotten. And then you add that up to all of the things that over 10, 20, 40, 60 years really, really start to add up, right? One partner simply does not know how to do taxes. They have never had to do complex taxes before. I've done the taxes for me and my nesting partner, the Gothic Enigma who lives in my house, since we were, I don't know, for almost, 8 years now? She's never had to do the complex taxes. It's not that she would be unable to figure it out, but it would be a big learning curve for her. She'd have to remember how to do any taxes, much less the most complicated taxes. And it's just all of those things start piling up. So I think that what Felix is actually saying, probably, just based on what they were saying earlier in this conversation, is that they live together like two people who really understand each other's needs and who really understand how to work with each other and who are partners. Right? They are, again, as I say in all of these, right, regardless of the type of relationship, the behaviors in the relationship, when I say that two people are nesting partners, I'm not necessarily saying that they're sleeping together. I'm not necessarily saying that they're romantically entangled. They might be essentially queer platonic life partners. I think essentially most of stray kids are each other's queer platonic life partner in one way or another. But however that looks, they are essentially nesting partners, right? They are two people who are in a partnership with each other, who are living with each other. Again, what that partnership entails or looks like is uncertain, but I think that's what he's saying when he's saying that we're like a married couple, is the way we live together functions like a partnership. Yeah. Hey, you want to load?
내가 뭐 2인분 시켜서 너 먹으라 그러고 그랬었는데 청국장이랑 제육볶음이랑 막 시켜가지고 근데 요새는 또 잘 챙겨 먹더라.
스케줄 끝나자마자 야 김치찌개 하나씩 시킬까? 고기 목살 제일 많은 데로 막 식당 찾아보고 시켜서 먹고.
진짜 옛날인데 제가 맛있다고 생각한 식당에 한정식 차림식 식당에 용복이를 데려갔었어요. 근데 그렇게 용복이가 밥을 잘 먹는 아이라는 걸 몰랐고 그냥 그때는 얼마 안 됐을 때니까 밥을 무슨 전투 마치고 온 장군처럼 막 먹길래 아 되게 한식을 좋아하는 친구구나 라고 입력이 됐고 그 뒤로 제가 좋아하는 식당에 다 데려갔는데 데려간 식당마다 너무 좋아하고 밥을 그때처럼 먹어서 내가 좋아하는 식당이기도 하면서 그걸 좀 나눌 수 있다라는 마음에 편하게 밥 먹는 사이인 것 같아요. 어쩌다가 우리 행위를 시작하게 됐지?
I wanna rewatch that.
먹자.
고기 목 승민이는 뭐 창문 열고 그다음 바람 이제 공기 좀 리세트 될 수 있게 그런 것도 많이 생각해줘. 그래서 되게 서로 그냥 같이 살고 있는 부부 같아요.
하도 그때 겨울인가 밥 안 먹어가지고 내가 뭐 2인분 시켜서 너 먹으라 그러고 그랬었는데 청국장이랑 제육볶음이랑 막 시켜가지고 근데 요새는 또 잘 챙겨 먹더라.
스케줄 끝나자마자 야 김치찌개 하나 시키자. 고기 목살 제일 많은데 막 식당 찾아보고 시켜서 먹고.
진짜 옛날인데 제가 맛있다고 생각한 식당에 한정식 차림식 식당에 용복이를 데려갔었어요.
He said back then when it was winter, and this was when they were living together, and they shared a dorm. But I am, like, before they moved into with each other, but I'm actually going to assume that this was last winter. And I'm gonna this is an assumption. This is a presumption based on other things. I will explain why. I might get emotional. We'll see. So, in the Australia codes, where they went to Australia at the end of last year, they wrote like little notes to the group at the end, and Felix said something that I have not stopped thinking about. It really struck me. And part of the reason it really struck me was because there were, at the time, I don't remember exactly what, but there were at the time a lot of things that Felix was saying and doing that, you know, I'm not somebody who gets online and is like, I'm super concerned about Felix, or I'm super concerned about whoever for whatever reason. Sometimes I will sort of like, as a joke, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I get stressed when somebody says this, but like I'm not really going to seriously, you know, I don't feel, I guess, protective over them in that way, because like they don't know me, I don't know them. I just don't find it helpful to spend significant time being like deeply concerned, like actually about this thing I have no control over. But he was saying and doing some things that I was like, from an outside perspective, a little bit unnerved by. And then during that code, he said like he said something like he thanked his members and he said, it doesn't feel cold anymore, or at least like that's how it was translated. Something like that was, I don't feel cold anymore. Which sort of just reemphasized this idea to me of like, okay, Felix is probably not doing super hot. And again, I didn't say anything about it because like you know, he has access to his members. I did recently learn a lot more about how Idol companies and JYPE in particular manages therapy, which made me feel slightly less horrified by the absolute lack of therapeutic services, but not like very good about it. Because unfortunately, based on what I can tell at least, there's not really any protections between the company and the therapists who they outsource to. And while the outsourced therapists do tend to have, I was told this by somebody who works as a psychologist in Southern Korea, and like the psychologists that the association that manages artist therapeutic support, they do have higher bar of education and requirements. I wasn't able to get like a full rundown of exactly what those requirements are. Based on what I heard, I wasn't like blown away, but they were certainly better than what the Korean legal requirement is. However, there are just fundamental ethical issues with contracted therapists when there is not a strong barrier to privacy. While Southern Korea has PIPA, that is much more like GDPR than it is like HIPAA. From what I can tell, the healthcare personal information stuff, like, there's just not a lot, at least if there is, it's only been very recently implemented, which means it's probably not like behaviorally enacted on yet. There's very little barrier between like the company finding out information from a psychologist and the psychologist working with the idol, which is obviously a huge ethical problem. However, they do have more access to mental health care than I realized. That being said, disordered eating is complicated. And whether the disordered eating is what's creating the problems or there are other problems that are creating the disordered eating, honestly, usually the answer is both. What usually happens is that disordered eating, and I say disordered eating, I'm not saying an eating disorder because there's, like, that implies a singular diagnosis, whereas disordered eating is a set of behaviors that include traits of eating disorders that may or may not be diagnosable as any one eating disorder. But a lot of people, when they imagine disordered eating, they imagine something very extreme. They imagine the most severe version of an eating disorder, because I'm not going to say disordered eating. I'm going to say when most people think about disordered eating, they imagine not just an eating disorder, but what would usually be like a residential level of care for an eating disorder. Very often what they imagine is a very, very skinny, very often white female. And they imagine like the food intake is so rough that they are deeply malnourished, they're passing out, they're, basically unable to function. That is such a severe eating disorder. By the time someone gets there, like, we have massive amounts of intervention to do. By the time somebody gets there, they're looking at least a year minimum for recovery. And that's like with a lot of strong support, a lot of dedication, a lot of motivation. Like that's, and probably an eating disorder that severe has been building up for 3, 5, 10, 20 years. Disordered eating habits are much smaller than that and can come from a lot of different places and can be attributed to a lot of different things and very rarely are attributed to just one. I've only really once seen somebody who had, I'll say twice. No, I'll say once. I've only once seen somebody whose eating disorder was really just one thing. And it was this young person. I obviously can't talk much about it because, client-patient or confidentiality, but I've worked with a lot of ADHD people, so this is not rare. It was a young ADHD person and probably also autistic. And that was it. Like, they just had absolutely no interest in food. And over time, there were inappropriate methods to try to make them interested in food, because we're very bad at teaching parents how to parent, in, supporting children with very limited palates, especially children with limited palates due to certain types of neurodivergence, which is usually going to be the case if you have a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and they just keep perpetuating that they have this very, very, very limited, rigid palate. It's often, there's often some sort of sensory relationship there. And they just didn't care about food. They just did not care about food. And people kept trying to make them care about food. And it was just too understimulating for them. And that is the only time, I've seen that a lot where that is part of the problem, but like, it's not the whole problem. I've only seen it once that it was 100% of the problem. And that creates an eating disorder. It can create an eating disorder called ARFID, or OFSD, alternate restrictive feeding disorder, or otherwise specified eating disorder. Usually ARFID. That's often what you get. But usually, eating disorders come from a lot of different things. And then what happens is that the eating disorder itself, you have to understand, we conceptualize eating disorders differently than just about any other mental illness, for a lot of reasons that I won't get into. But we conceptualize them very, very differently. We conceptualize eating disorders much more like a parasite that is attempting to take over a host's body than we do for, again, other mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, things like that. And that's because of how much disordered eating will fundamentally change a person's personality. And it has nothing to do with that person, who they are, their motivation path, anything like that. It's just because of what a underfed or undernourished, which are sort of two different things, right? But a body that does not have the appropriate nutrients, how it reacts to not having the appropriate nutrients. So eating disorders themselves, we sort of conceptualize as this almost parasitic, hostile external entity that becomes internal. And so because of that, it will perpetuate behaviors and make them worse and more difficult. So let's say somebody, part of their eating disorder rather, is that they are very depressed. Well, the eating disorder itself, from that mental model, kind of metaphorically, will leverage that depression and try to make that person more depressed in order to perpetuate the eating disorder, right? In order to continue to survive. Because if that person becomes less depressed, they will be less likely to be engaging with their eating disorder. And that's a threat to the eating disorder's perpetuance. So, whatever type of sort of disordered eating traits that Felix's was showing, and that definitely is, right? Like, if somebody is noticing that you are not eating, if an external person is noticing that you are not eating, there is probably some type of disordered eating, unless there is a, very physical restriction. And even then, chronic pain can create disordered eating, wherein you're in so much pain, it's causing executive dysfunction, you're feeling nauseated, and so you don't want to put yourself through the effort of eating. It's still disordered eating because it's not like there is a gastrointestinal issue that is stopping you from eating, and that is still reducing your, fed is best. We need to make sure that people are getting the appropriate nutrients. Sometimes people have highly restrictive diets or highly restrictive needs because of issues related to certain foods. Unfortunately, that can also perpetuate disordered eating because you have to start hyper-focusing on food. That's a whole different thing. But if people are starting to be like, hey, you're not eating, I need to figure out how to get you to eat, there's some type of disordered eating at hand. The way Felix talks about food in Bubble and a lot of other things is not what I've it's very difficult to look at that and believe that it is coming from a healthy relationship with food, just from my experience as a clinician. So this is really sweet. And I think that also when we're talking about like those skills that people bring, making sure someone eats, making sure these days you eat well again, right? You eat well again. I just get the impression that, yeah, this is something that is somewhat cyclical. That does happen periodically. I do have this suspicion that when they're talking about that time in winter, they probably are talking about this last winter because of the other things that Felix was sort of saying in different types of media. And again, the way he was talking about food in Bubble last winter. But it might not be. But knowing that we feel comfortable enough with somebody to be able to get to move past certain disordered eating habits, to be able to comfortably eat well, that's so important. And if you know that you struggle with disordered eating or you are in recovery from an eating disorder, like, it requires community support. And so living with someone who you can comfortably eat with is like pivotal.
제육볶음이랑 막 시켜가지고. 근데 요새는 또 잘 챙겨 먹더라.
스케줄 끝나자마자 야 김치찌개 하나씩 시킬까? 고기 목살 제일 많은 데로 막 식당 찾아보고 시켜서 먹고.
진짜 옛날인데 제가 맛있다고 생각한 식당에 한정식 차림식 식당에 용복이를 데려갔었어요. 근데 그렇게 용복이가 밥을 잘 먹는 아이라는 걸 몰랐고 그냥 그때는 얼마 안 됐을 때니까 밥을 무슨 전투 마치고 온 장군처럼 막 먹길래 아 되게 한식을 좋아하는 친구구나 라고 입력이 됐고 그 뒤로 제가 좋아하는 식당에 다 데려갔는데 데려간 식당마다 너무 좋아하고 밥을 그때처럼 먹어서 내가 좋아하는 식당이기도 하면서 그걸 좀 나눌 수 있다라는 마음에 편하게 밥 먹는 사이인 것 같아요.
That is also something that's really, really common with disordered eating and eating disorders is that. So what a lot of these things are based around is food rules. And this is true for basically all forms of disordered eating, whether those forms are related to some type of body dysmorphia or control issues like anorexia, bulimia, OSFED, or whether they're related very often to fear of food or like sensory impact or things like that, which is what we get with like ARFID. All of them still come down to food rules. And what is very common is that people will have certain things that they can eat very, very well. But anything outside of that, they really, really struggle with. This is especially the case with ARFID. I've seen this over and over and over and over again with ARFID, wherein people will eat just an infinite amount of whatever it is that is safe to them, but really struggle with anything outside of that safety. And, you know, what will happen is even if they start to sort of recover from that, if they hit another really stressful point in their life, or like that need for safety increases, or they start to feel more unsafe in a situation for whatever reason, they'll pull back on those things that they had spread themselves out to, and then pull back to their known safe foods. But this can also be true for other types of disordered eating, especially if there are food rules around what is healthy and unhealthy. and Felix talks about healthy and unhealthy foods all the time, and like that's kind of normal idle behavior because but again, disordered eating is super, super pervasive. And the way that we talk about food is very, very disordered in culture. So, like, it is just a disordered relationship in culture to associate certain foods as being good or bad. Even healthy and unhealthy is usually not a valuable dichotomy because that's very individual per body. Knowing that something is not healthy for me in that it tends to hurt my body more than it tends to help my body, that doesn't mean that that's the case for other people. And what people will do is they'll see other people talking about foods that are unhealthy for them and apply it to themselves. But also, most food is just food in moderation. You know, yes, for most people, probably, if you only eat Twinkies, your body will feel bad after a while. But that's also true for just about anything, right? Like, if you only eat strawberries, your body will also feel bad. Like, if you only eat lamb, your body will also feel bad. Most people, right? I'm not going to say for everybody. I don't know everybody. But for most people, probably, if you only eat one thing, your body's going to feel like shit eventually. So, like, the dichotomy of healthy and unhealthy isn't even that much more useful than the dichotomy of good and bad foods. So, yes, idols talk about healthy and unhealthy all the time, but, like, that doesn't make it not a disordered way of engaging with food. So, what will happen is people will have this idea of what is a healthy versus an unhealthy food. Really common ones, especially these days. So it used to be that the really common one was fat, right? That fat is a bad food or an unhealthy food or anything with a lot of fat. That's still a common one. It's less common now than it used to be. Now it's carbs, right? Especially refined carbs. Or it'll be preservatives, or it'll be, words on a package I can't pronounce, or like we'll have this rule of what is bad, and that can't be touched. That can't even be handled. Again, at a higher acuity level, generally I see that at like IOP, PHP. Ideally at an IOP level, you're starting to be able to like practice with these bad foods. You're starting to be able to eat them. They're not 100% off the table, but if it's within a good foods category, you can eat as much of it as you want, right? So I'd see people who they could eat as many vegetables. They'd be like, well, I ate all of my vegetables. Or like, well, I got 70% of my calorie goal and it was all in fruits and vegetables, or it was all in whole wheat, or it was all in, whatever they've determined is healthy or like within the food rules. And then they just like won't touch other things. So this is why I actually like I think sometimes when people call out some of the less normative behaviors with food that some of these kids exhibit, I am actually pretty uncomfortable because a lot of those things can be very representative of disordered eating. So for instance, Felix is like eating 5 pieces of pizza at once. That is 100% the type of thing I would see in a lot of eating disorders. Especially OSFED or ARFID or bulimia, especially with compensatory exercise. So a lot of people with bulimia, they just imagine like vomiting, but very commonly bulimia isn't that the way that it's like an intake output thing. You can intake as much as you want as long as you like exercise enough to burn off more. So that's what we call bulimia with compensatory exercise, or other things like that. So we see that type of really non-standard and often binge-like behavior in a lot of eating disorders. And so I don't really engage with those jokes very often. I very rarely engage with joking about like how people interact with food, because it can be really hit and miss. But it is really like meaningful and special, again, like I said, to have that person who knows like, okay, this person I love isn't eating enough. I need them to eat enough. I know they'll eat Korean food. Like that's within their rules. And when we're dealing with disordered eating, like you need to eat, so you need to engage with those rules sometimes. It's just like OCD treatment where it takes a lot of like small iterative work and practice to be able to tolerate eating outside of those rules. And so having somebody who, yeah, you're just really comfortable with, who also knows exactly how to get you to eat, is so important, so meaningful. So
어쩌다가 우리 팽이를 시작하게 됐지? 갑자기 너가 꽂혔어. 그 노래를
맞아.
부르고
내가
메탈 파이 갑자기 팽이를 사고
어렸을 때 기억에 남았던 진짜 재밌게 놀았던
such cute nerds.
장난감.
판을 저기 뭐 챙겨왔는데
야, 와 진짜 나의 최애. 근데 원래 이렇게 작았나? 손이 와.
They had so much of their childhood kind of taken away from them in some ways, right? Like obviously Felix joined being an idol later on,
항상 그렇게 했어.
but still like
판이 있어야 재밌지.
그러니까.
같이 해보자 같이.
그래. 와 근데 원래 이렇게 작았나?
you know, they were kids, but they didn't have enough time to be kids, I think.
이게 내 최애였어 사실.
And I love how much of their relationship is based in play.
노랑. 막 이렇게
진짜로? 그렇게 했었어?
널 죽이겠다 이러고. 야.
It's so healthy to have a relationship based in play like this. It's so healthy.
한 10개 있어요 진짜.
우리 한 10개 있나?
둘은 몇 살 때까지 이러고 놀까 이러는데 저희가 이게 이런 걸 많이 하진 않아요.
Don't.
그냥 어쩌다 한 번씩 하는 거고
그냥 장난으로
얘기하는 거.
할 게 없어서 그냥 이렇게 된 거예요. 나 오랜만에
You don't have to justify it, just play. It's so good for you.
어린 용복이랑 어린 승민이가 그러니까 만나게 된 그런 상상이 됐어요. 만약에 어렸을 때 우리 같이 팽이하고 놀고 시간 같이 보냈으면 진짜 많이 친해졌겠다라는 생각이 들었어. 나 항상 스케줄
It's so good to
끝나고
know that you're
그 멘탈 나간 모습.
서로 거울 보면서.
that the youngest version of yourselves would love each other too. I think that's something really meaningful, especially when somebody like Felix, who, you know, he's disconnected from everybody who he would have known as a child, like very, very disconnected. Obviously, I don't know how many people besides his family he still knows from when he was a kid, but it's not like he's close physically. He probably doesn't have a lot of time to, you know, communicate with them. So kind of building that childish, play-oriented relationship with the people he has now as an adult, that is so healthy. It's so good for you. Play is such an important part of the human experience. And whether it's play with toys or whether it's play with your D&D crew, right? I've been running a D&D game almost weekly for 6 years now, almost 7. And it's the same thing, right? It's just playing with mental toys instead of physical toys. Though sometimes there's physical toys, right? There's shiny math rocks. It's the same thing, and it's so good for you.
엘베 안에 거울이 있으니까 옆에 보니
녹초가 돼 있더라 둘 다.
초점이 안 보여. 난 볼 때마다 너무 웃겨가지고. 그래 웃으니까 샤워할 힘이 있다.
근데 너가 되게 생활 패턴적으로 나한테 맞춰주려고 되게 노력을 많이 하는 것 같긴 해. 박스 정리하는 거,
박스 정리.
어지르는 거나. 가끔은 그래. 내가 되게 너무 불편하게 굴었나? 라는 생각도 들 만큼 잘 신경 써주는 것 같긴 해. 그래서 너무 고맙고. 내가 되게 사실 엄청 깔끔한 편이잖아. 사는 거에 있어서.
그치.
근데 그게 안 그렇다고 해서 절대 틀린 게 아니고 그냥 각자의 생활 습관이 있는 건데 사실 너가 나한테 더 맞춰주는 부분이 큰 것 같아.
뭐 많이
think he's
구매하거나
about
많이
to say.
사면 어쨌든 놀 데가 없고 그러다 보니까 이렇게 사는 게 맞긴 해. 그래서 나도 그냥 널 그냥 따라가.
그렇게
Yeah, I mean that's really it. Is that like they're considerate of each other, and I often think it's probably a sign of a good relationship when both individuals are like, no, but you're great. Why do you put up with me when you're great? And both of them sort of feel that way. You know, Seungmin is saying here like you're super considerate of me and my needs, and Felix is saying like, well, but that's like I'm also the one who's buying the most shit, right? What am I gonna do? Just like leave it everywhere and make my life impede on yours? That's not consideration. That's like kind of not being a jerk, you know, of I buy the most stuff and I'm going to leave it everywhere. Seungmin is also being really considerate here, though, by being like, it would be fair, you know, this is not your natural way of living. It'd be fair if you didn't put so much effort into living like this. And that's a really considerate thing to think about. And I think that because they both are willing to flex in some ways, it makes both of them feel less resistance to flexing for themselves. Like that's just very common of people. Again, they're just very well matched in their consideration of each other and where they're willing to flex and where they understand like what's my responsibility and what's your responsibility.
그래야 같이 오래 살 수 있는 거잖아. 불편한 감이 없어야 돼.
난 진짜 둘이 사는데 그게 너랑 같이 사는 거여서 되게 고맙고 좋고 되게 고마운 게 많아 엄청.
그래?
진짜.
They're really good nesting partners. And it's because they grew up living with each other, you know.
처음 보는 사람들이나 그런 사람들 있으면 인사이드 하잖아. 약간 아이잖아. 너는 되게 약간 거리낌.
인트로버트야.
내 친구들이랑 같이 놀 때도 그냥 바로 거의 말 놓고. 그래서 뭔가 내 친구들 이렇게 소개시켜 줄 때도 전혀 걱정도 없었고 친구들도 되게 좋아하고 귀엽다고.
내 친구들이 웃겨. 근데 나는 이제 그건 편한 거지. 그러니까 친구들이 오랫동안 너무 알았으니까.
되게 내적 친밀감이 있지. 나랑 같이 살기도 하고 본인들한테는 연예인 이런 느낌이니까. 근데 실제로 보니까 이제 너무 좋았대. 연봉이 되게 정감 있다. 뭐라 해야 돼? 사람 냄새라고 해야 되나?
People's 뭔지 알 것 같아.
휴머니티가 되게 좋다.
숙소에서 이제 좀 외롭잖아. 솔직히 우리는 근데 너가 오늘 뭐해? 밥 먹을래? 아니면 오늘 뭐 먹자. 그래서 너가 할 때 그게 좀 많이 위로가 많이 되는 것 같아. 따뜻한 아우라가 느껴. 마음이 편해지고.
사실 나도 되게.
And just really quick, I think it's a really good point that like when you really trust somebody, you trust them to have good community and you trust them to be able to bring that community together. And so it's just another point of like how much trust they have in each other and how that trust is what's creating this comfortability, right? I think a lot of people believe that first you become comfortable with somebody and then you learn to trust them, but it's usually the other way around. You have to sort of decide to have faith in them, decide to trust them, and then you can learn to become comfortable with them after that trust, that faith is reinforced.
이게 혼자 있는 시간이 중요한 사람이고 혼자 있는 시간이 너무 필요한 사람인데 왁자지껄한 단체 활동이 아니어도 너랑 같이 막 뭐 밥을 먹거나 그냥 진짜 사소한 거여도 진짜 시시콜콜한 이야기들 이렇게 나눌 수 있다는 것 자체가 되게 좋고 고마운 일이고 사실 너가 나한테 알려주고 이렇게 가르쳐주는 그런
I'm gonna watch that because I have sort of a curiosity about
시시콜콜한 이야기들
something.
이렇게 나눌 수
아니면 오늘 뭐
먹자. 그래서 막 할 때 그게 좀 많이 위로가 많이 되는 것 같아. 따뜻한
that taking care of each other thing.
아우라가 느껴. 마음이 편해지고.
사실 나도 되게 혼자 있는 시간이 중요한 사람이고 혼자 있는 시간이 너무 필요한 사람인데 왁자지껄한 단체 활동이 아니어도 너랑 같이 막 뭐 밥을 먹거나 그냥 진짜 사소한 거여도 진짜 시시콜콜한 이야기도 이렇게 나눌 수 있다는 것 자체가 되게 좋고 고마운 일이고 사실 너가 나한테 알려주고 이렇게
I found that it's true that a lot of people who identify as quote unquote introverts, and I don't love the introversion to extroversion scale, and per usual, MBTI is shenanigans. But a lot of people who think that they really value alone time, I'm not saying that they don't, but, and certainly I'm someone who does, but what they really value is time with people in quiet ways, right? They value certain people a lot and they want to spend chunks of time with those people in ways that are, that don't take a lot of energy, that don't take a lot of executive functioning. We all know my feelings about how very autism coded Seungmin is, and that sort of like parallel play that involves sometimes randomly bringing up stories like parallel eating together and maybe not saying a lot, but then like we can sort of just chit chat as we come up with chit chat. That's something that a lot of folks really gravitate to a lot more than they think they do, because there's this idea that introversion means just totally being alone, being completely in solitude and having that restore your energy. I just don't find that that's as useful a dichotomy and not as common as sort of the big versus small, the loud versus quiet, the, separate but together versus the all together, right? Those tend to be more important to people, I find.
가르쳐주는 그런 내용들도 많고 그래서 되게 좋아. 같이 이렇게 있거나 시간 보낼 때 바쁜 와중에도 그래도 사람한테 이렇게 의지가 되고 있구나라는 게 많이 느껴져서 덕분에 뭔가 숙소가 조금 더 해피하우스 같은 느낌이 된 것 같아. 집이다. 약간 이런 느낌이 많이 느껴져. 제 가까운 사람들한테 거의 뭐 소개를 시켜준 첫 번째 멤버인 것 같은데 아무래도 같이 살다 보니까
Yeah, they lived together for so long.
지금 나와서 친구들이랑 시간 보내면 같이 보낼래? 이렇게 물어보고 용모이도 너무 좋아해요. 되게 꺼리낌 없이 지금 친구들이랑 얘기하는 사이가 됐고 그걸 되게 좋아해요. 용모이가 그런 분위기를 사람들한테 이렇게 둘러싸여 있고 자기 얘기를 되게 재밌게 들어주고 하는 사람들이 있으면 누구보다 되게 즐거워하는 애여서 앞으로도 그런 시간을 되게 편하게 많이 보내려고 하고 되게 좋아요. 우리 둘 다 자연스럽게 되게.
Yeah, this is something that I've seen some people talk about. Yeah, people will often theorize about the dorm setups, and I try not to have too many opinions about it, but I did see someone saying this once, and I thought it was a really, really good point of like, why Felix and Seungmin? Okay, not just because they have, like, they shared a room for so long, and then they shared a dorm, and they share, like, that's part of it, right? They know each other really well. Why would you acclimate to a new person at that point? But Felix does have social needs. And there's not a lot of options in the group that actually make sense for that, right? So basically, you have to take any Sriracha member out of the equation because who the fuck knows when they're around. So that really leaves Hyunjin, Seungmin, and IN. And, Hyunjin has a lot of solo schedules and also is known to just fuck off, right? Like, he had this whole thing of like, oh yeah, one time I just went to Jeju on a whim, right? Like, you can't really stably say that somebody who has that much of their own their own work travel that they do and also is that impulsive is like a stable source of your social needs. And IN has talked about his like strong need for spending time alone and is a little bit of like you know, much more hesitant with touching and cuddles and things like that. And Seungmin is a little bit too, but I just do feel like essentially it probably only really made sense for it to be a choice between those two, just because of Felix's social needs. I don't know that they could have been met by any other member. Am I missing any? I'm missing Lino. I'm missing Lino. They might have been able to be met by Lino. I think I'm probably missing Lino because I think it was just a given that he was going to room with Han. I think I just took him and Han out of the equation completely.
생각도 많아지고.
맞아.
왜냐면 20대 초반 때랑 뭐 10대 후반 때랑 뭐 연생자랑 비교하면
다르지.
이게 너무 다르거든. 물론 또 30대가 되고 나서 또 이때를 돌이켜 보면 와, 저때 너무 되게 어렵다 싶겠지만 난 지금 순간이 너무 좋고. 뭔가 이렇게 막 엄청.
That's a really great place to be in your mid 20s. It's not common to be in that place in your mid 20s. To feel content.
우리 다 막 서로 막 엄청 그러니까 오래 시간을 보내지 못했잖아 우리. 데뷔하고 어쨌든 알아가면서 누구는 부딪히는 부분도 있고 누구는 맞는 점도 있고 어쨌든 계속 찾아가 그 과정이었잖아. 많은 큰 도움을 많이 돼줬어 너가. 그래서 이렇게 살게 된 거지 않을까 싶어.
오씨, 감동인데. 너 자체가 되게 옛날에 대해서 많이 이게 생긴 것 같아. 그
정확함?
뼈대가 생긴 것 같아.
뼈대가?
그러니까 옛날에는 살짝 이랬다면 지금 그냥 딱 이게 있어서 뭐 솔직히 뭐 더 도와줄 것도 없고 너만의
I've said this about Seungmin in other content, so I won't really go into it. But yeah, he seems to be very he seems to have spent a lot of time thinking about how people work and why people work that way, and he really, really has a lot of love and care and affection for his members. And you know, I think that he's focused a lot of his mental time and energy on understanding and loving his members, and so I can see him being a huge support in that way. And people have mentioned, you know, the members have mentioned how much of a support Seungmin is emotionally and socially for them. So unsurprising there. I'm also really unsurprised about this sort of, because some members have also brought it up, but also you just see earlier content of Felix. And it's true, like he really struggled with confidence. And part of that was his language learning skills at the beginning. I don't know what else contributed to it, but you know, Changbin has said this in previous content as well, that like Felix really started to have to learn to be his own person, have his own ideas, have his own values in his late teens and early 20s, which is, again, super common. It's a pretty common place to have to learn that. And so, you know, just being able to say like, yeah, you've clearly grown in, especially somebody who does want to please people as much as Felix does, who does want to love people as much as Felix does, who does want to be around people as much as Felix does. Of course, it can be very hard to build boundaries because boundaries can feel like walls, and it can be very hard to stand up for what you believe in, and it can be very hard to decide that you believe in something that maybe other people are against or that other people will dislike you for. That can be a really difficult thing to do. You have to build a very, very strong sense of self.
기준이 딱 이렇게 있어서 되게 보기 좋아. 누구한테도 흔들리지 않고 쓴소리를 들었거나 그런 얘기를 들었을 때 옛날 같았으면 되게 혼자 속상해하고 이랬을 텐데 안 흔들리고 딱 그냥 너가 이제 되게
Yeah, which is exactly what Seungmin is sort of saying right
너가
now.
옆에서 항상 말해주고 그리고 리드를 잘 해주니까 인생에 뭐 필요한 것들 뭐 이런 거 있고 나는 솔직히 말해서 한국에서는 잘 모르는 게 많잖아. 너가
It's interesting because I feel like Felix has said this about a few people. So I think he just really sees how much everybody has helped him with developing his sense of self and his own like values and core ideas. And just being able to say that like his relationship with his members is so secure that it's easier for him to be firm in who he is. And this is just how like more secure attachments work, is as you build more secure attachments, you become more firm in like the people who I really care about, people who are really important to me. the people whose values I admire, who I admire as a person, the people who make me a better version of myself, are going to love me. Even if I fuck up, you know, even if something goes a little wrong, even if I have sort of a messed up idea or ideal for a little while, they'll help me grow past it. They will love me, they will help me, they will support me. I don't need everyone to be okay with me if I know that these people love and support me as I really am.
아는 게 되게 많으니까 불편하게 알려주지 않고 억지로 알려주지 않잖아. 너가 정말 진심으로 이 친구를 도와주고 싶어서 그만큼 내가 고마워 오히려. 너가 난 절대로
That's actually,
아는 게 되게
if I'm
많으니까
understanding this
불편하게
right.
알려주지 않고 억지로 알려주지 않잖아. 너가 정말 진심으로 이 친구를 도와주고 싶어서 그만큼 내가 고마워 오히려. 너가
Wow. Seungmin would be a great therapist. I'm just putting this out there right now. Everything I have seen about Seungmin tells me that he would be an excellent therapist. Because that's exactly what you have to do as a therapist, is you have to be able to identify, like, okay, this person is missing some information that would be really helpful to them, or this person is missing some context, or this person needs a bit of a reframe, right? But you can't just tell a person to do that. We know it doesn't work. You cannot just tell a person, don't do that. You can't just tell a person, that's a bad idea. If you get close enough, you eventually sort of can. You know, I have a couple clients who I've been seeing for a couple of years who I can sort of be like, I'm concerned that's not a good idea. And I can say it that bluntly. But even that is not as blunt as like, that is a bad idea. I very rarely will say that is a bad idea unless I have like imminent safety concerns or like something like that. And again, only if I have a really good rapport with my client. It is a lot more effective to be like, hey, this might be information that would be helpful to you. Which it sounds like is kind of exactly what Felix is saying, is that like, you know a lot of this, and I had to come to terms with not. But the way you've told me has been inviting me into the process of understanding, not just forcing it on me.
난 절대로 그거 잔소리라고 느껴지지 않아. 나 무조건 난 듣고 오케이. 너가 그만큼 나한테 얘기해 주려고 그 마음이 있으니까 난 그게 진짜 감동이야. 안 좋게 생각하면 듣기 싫은 아빠가 아들한테 하는 말처럼 막 들 수도 있는데 근데 난 전혀 그렇게 한 번도 느낀 적 없어.
나 진짜 근데 싫어하는 사람이나 보기 싫은 사람한테는 그런 얘기도 안 하고.
그러니까 난 오히려 그게 형제처럼
Yeah.
느끼는 거지.
Yeah, that's a mood.
되게 큰 사람이에요. 저한테는 뭐
Yeah, I think Seungmin would be a great therapist, and I think he'd be a therapist a lot like me.
또 같이 시간 보내면 정말 둘도 없는 멤버, 친구 이런 느낌이고. 그래서 제가 좋은 영향을 많이 받죠. 저한테 없는 모습들을 많이 가지고 있으니까 그런 부분들을 좀 자연스럽게 서로 공유하고 흡수하면서 되게 좋은 룸메이트가 되는 것 같아요. 진심이에요. 나는 개인적으로 소리꾼 때 머리 이렇게 따고 길게 하고 그런 거 하고 나왔을 때 와, 이게 이런 스타일을 그렇게 찰떡으로 소화하는 사람이 없었던 것 같은데 그게 정말 멋있었어.
그때 내가 아이디어를 냈어.
그러니까
나는 그때 우리 킹덤 3팀으로 나눠서
러브 포엠 불렀을 때
와 진짜 찢었다. 야 우리는 이겼다. 심지어 웃긴 게 뭔지 알아? 창빈 형이 울었어. 왜 운지 알아?
그래?
창빈 형이 운 이유가
It's not the first you're hearing this, but yeah, you can't remember every conversation you've ever had.
빡세게 보컬 연습을 많이 하고 성실하게 일을 하고 새벽까지 나가서 또 수업도 받고 그게 진짜 쉬운 누구나 할 수 있는 일이 아니야. 많은 추억들이 떠오르면서 진짜 우리가 다 보고
It's almost like he's incredibly attached to his special interest. Or something.
감동 받았어. 창빈 형은 뒤에서 그 막 보면서 눈물 하나 막 진짜 내려갔어.
이건 처음 듣는다.
몰랐어 그때?
창민이 온 건 몰랐어.
창빈 형 우는 거 보고 나도 울 뻔했어 진짜.
오랜만에 또 그때 러브 포엠 얘기 듣는데 그때랑 지금이랑 비교해 보면은 또 엄청 많이 달라지긴 했다.
많이 가수로서 난 진짜
Yeah, he was incredible, and
나는
he's even more incredible
그걸
now.
지켜보면서 와 그냥 아무렇지 않게 그냥 노래를 이제 부르네. 와, 다 각자 한 명씩 다 하는 역할이 있잖아. 해야 될 일이 있잖아. 팀으로서. 다만 와 그냥 그렇게 자신 있게 아 그래요 이 곡 벌써 하고 바로 한다는 게 나는 그게 나였으면 와 이건 몇 번 연습을 해야 되고 어떻게 준비를 하지.
엄청 고민하긴 했어.
I think it's pretty clear that Felix does still have a lot of confidence issues. He's clearly grown so much into them. But pretty much every time you hear him talk about his confidence and like what he has to do to feel confident, it does not sound like it does sound like he's built a lot of confidence through that sort of like fake it till you make it kind of way, which like can work. Does not work super great, but certainly can. But when you have a job, I think I said this in, I don't remember if it was my last reaction video with Seungmin and Ayan or if it was the Chansung one, but when you have a job and you're somebody who understands orders and directions and categorizations, you can understand the nature of your job. And you understand this is the nature of my job, and I can put on that role, I can act in that role, and I can make it seem very confident because I know what I have to do in that role. And this is how I got through most of my late teens and early 20s. Was that like I could be very, very good at customer service, at socializing in a workplace, at managing relationships between coworkers, but the second I would leave the workplace and try to socialize with them socially, I'd utterly collapse, right? Like that was not rules of engagement I understood or realized. And so I often had the problem where people would think that I was very, very confident and just didn't like them very much. Because what they would see is that like within my job role that I understood what I needed to do and how I needed to do it. I could be a very confident public speaker. I could do my job very confidently, right? But really, I just knew what the rules and expectations were. And I could meet those. Even if I didn't feel like I was meeting them well, I could still do them. But outside of that context, I couldn't. And I'd feel very unconfident of myself inside of that context, outside of that context as well, because I couldn't get the validation that I was doing things correctly, because I couldn't ask for it. This is so common. I've seen so many people with exactly that issue. And part of that is because of the population I work with, right? I work with a lot of ADHD autistic people, and that is a very common experience for especially autistic folks. Also dissociative folks. Very common experience for people with strong dissociative tendencies.
매번 근데 버블에 그 손바에 올라오면은 되게 남자 막 이렇게
맞아.
얘기하잖아 팬들한테.
봤어?
이렇게 보이니까
아
유독 잘 챙겨 봐주더라고.
맞아.
25, 21 했을 때도 봤고.
그건 진짜 나는 들으면서 모습이 많이 예뻐졌다.
다듬어졌다.
스컬프처가 있으면 너가 잘 그거를 카빙을 잘 했고 나도 그런 너의 모습을 보면 나도 배울 게 아직도 많다고 생각해.
그건 진짜 둘 성격이 그건 똑같은 것 같아. 뭔가 이루고자 하는 게 있으면 무조건 해낸다. 사전에 곡을 몇 개를 이렇게 추려서 영국이한테 요새 흐름이 어떤가 이렇게 솔직하게
Oh, that's so sweet because he knows that he is completely out of touch with trends.
하면 좋을 것 같다 뭐 이런 그런 가벼운 조언들을 되게 편하게 해줘서 저도 물어보는 것 같고 또 영국이가 먼저 나오고 나면 항상 같이 살고 있으니까 진짜 그냥 툭 던져주거든요. 잘 봤다 아까 손바에 올라왔더라. 되게 그냥 사소한 그런 말들이어도 저한테는 되게 동기부여가 많이 되고 뿌듯해요. 이게 직접적으로 가장 가까이 있는 사람한테 듣는 거니까 사실 제일 잘 알거든요. 가까이 있는 사람이 요만큼 늘어도 요만큼 는 걸 제일 잘 캐치하고 툭 이렇게 얘기하는 그런 거에
Validation really
생각이
does
들
mean
때가
more by
하나
people you
장애
know.
있다고 하면
Like, it just
진짜
does.
심플하게 얘기해주면 나 그냥 스케줄 끝나고 우리 김치찌개 해다. 그때 기억나? 그때 그냥 길거리에서 너무 평화롭고 사람들이
맞아.
너무 행복해
우리
보이고
걸어갔었다.
맞아. 건물도 막 엄청 높아 보이지도 않고
처음 가보는 동네에서.
그치 분위기가 너무 따뜻했어. 그런 데서 너랑 같이 밥 먹으면서
그때 향이 갑자기 생각난다. 그
그치?
초겨울이었는데. It's right before winter.
그치
날씨.
맞아.
와.
그때 너무 좋았지 않았어? 난 그게
낭만이었어.
제일 좋았어. 할아버지 할머니들 왜 여기서 먹는지 아냐? 그
Seungmin has a really
너
strong sense of
알려줬잖아.
smell. This has been
여기
clearly a thing.
진짜 맛있으니까 진짜 맛있으니까
나 이미지 어떡하냐. 아무튼 그만큼 어르신들도 와서 먹는 식당일 만큼 그 동네에서 인정받는 식당이고.
그렇지. 너가 그렇게 말하니까 나 그렇구나. 너무 좋다.
Pays a lot of
나중에
attention to
우리도 나이
people.
먹을 때 여기 꼭 먹자고 그랬잖아. 너무 좋았어.
진짜 웃기네. 셀까지 꼭 가자.
Let's come
말과
back
향이.
here when we're old.
왜 이렇게 그 이미지가 생각이 나는지 모르겠는데, 그러니까 자기의 기준이 있고 고집도 있으면서도 되게 순수한 면모가 있고 순하고 순박하고 해서 주변 사람들한테 되게 행복감을.
I really like that notice because a lot of people will conflate innocence with naivete, or innocence with gullibility, or innocence with not having a firm backbone. And I think when they're talking about innocence here, now I don't know the Korean, I don't know the implications, but I think when they're talking about innocence with Felix, a lot of times what they're talking about is this sense of like, I don't really like using the words good and evil just in general, but there's this sort of like sense of innate goodness. There's this sense of like innate, that's very difficult to take away, of like love. Right? That's, I think, the purity that people are sort of talking about, is that constant desire to love other people that really seems like it can't be sullied in some ways. And so being able to say, like, he's very stubborn and he's has his convictions and he has the things that he believes. But that does not mean that he is not this very, like, infinitely compassionate and, like, person who loves very deeply and just wants to love, right? And that can be two truths that are very hard for people to hold on to. So I really like that, like, Seungmin is mentioning both of these things at the same time, of, like, yeah, he's kind of a stubborn pain in the ass who is not going to give up his beliefs. It's okay, I can call him a stubborn pain in the ass, I'm the same way. And, like, being that does not mean that he's not the sort of, like, hengbok that we talk about, that he's not this just, like, sense of light.
안겨주는 그런 바이러스가 있는 친구여서 그 워딩이 좀 잘 맞는 것 같아요. 말활량이
Like, sometimes the conviction is to love and to bring happiness.
말하고 싶어. 뭘 해도 너 남자야. 진짜 남자라 생각하고 배워가고 있다. 남자답게 살아. 자, 하나, 둘, 셋. 하나, 둘, 셋. 하나, 둘, 셋.
Oh, that's really sweet.
승민아, 내 인생에 옆에 있어줘서 진심으로 고마워. 나 너한테 많이 배우고 인생을 살고 있다. Thank you, bro. 너무 좋아.
용모가 항상 내 옆에 있어줘서 가끔은 너의 존재가 당연해지듯 싶다가도 서로의 곁에 있다는 게 참 운명 같고 고마운 일이라는 생각이 든다.
Oh.
언제나 지금처럼 앞으로도 잘 부탁할게. 승.
Seung! 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 Okay, well, fine. Just do that to me right at the end. Fucking whatever, man. Okay. This was about perfect timing, so I'm gonna wrap up with my content updates really quickly. I am still working on my next podcast episode. Why am I still working on my next podcast episode? Because somehow my conversations about alien and human and Han and neurodivergence resulted in me going on a complete deep dive onto what it means to be human. Okay? And there's like a whole postmodernism explanation and an like underpinning of meta-modernism in music and how Stray Kids utilize a meta-modern, postmodern musicality while also like it's very stupid. I shouldn't use the word stupid, I'm sorry. It's very silly. It's happening. I am a very OT8 biased person. However, I will joke that I have 4 biases and 4 wreckers. I love Dragon Racha, and most specifically, I love Dragon Racha's relationships with each other. I love them so much. So that's why I'm doing these 2kidsrooms super out of order now, is because this one came out. I really wanted to watch this one, because I love the two of them so much. Like, they're just clearly such an incredible support system in each other's lives, and they love each other so much, and they understand each other so well, and it's really, really beautiful. And I know the Hyunsung one just came out, and that's going to devastate me emotionally. I'm going to try to react to that, if not today, which at this point, probably not today, then tomorrow. And then eventually I'll get back on my other ones. I've done Chansung, and I've done Seungmin IN. The captions got fucked up. You have to turn on the English captions to watch the video captions. I might end up taking that video down and re-uploading it because I think it confused everybody. I don't know. So I've done those two. I have already watched Seungmin and Chan and Felix and Jongbin. So I'm going to come back to those ones at the end, watch them from a new lens of all of the others. I have some other things that I'm working on, but I haven't decided what order I'm doing them in or when I'm going to release them. So you can cope with that. Those are most of my content updates. I've been having medical appointments every day, so mostly I have very little content updates. It's just what it is for the next few weeks. Mid-September, I should be more back and running and functional, and hopefully we'll have finished this fucking podcast episode by then, because this is I've gotten myself in so deep on, and I need to pull myself out of this hole that I've pulled myself into. Yeah. Okay. Bye. Adios. Till next time.